Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today I'm returning after quite a hiatus to Order of Battle Pacific. This is the original base game, so just regular Order of Battle Pacific. In our last video for this particular series, we were playing the Japanese campaign, and we had just defeated the American Navy at the Battle of Midway. We had previously defeated them at Coral Sea, and as a result, the American flat tops have been largely wiped out. We are now moving to the Battle of Guadalcanal, which I find interesting. If Midway had fallen, I'm kind of curious. I wonder if there really would have been a Battle of Guadalcanal, because the American fleet certainly would not have been up to resisting the Japanese on Guadalcanal. The Japanese were moving to Guadalcanal, which was a area they started building an airfield on to extend their reach further south over the southern half of the Solomon Islands, as well as begin to move into a more threatening position to the supply routes to Australia. Now, this particular scenario looks like it takes place after the Americans have already landed on Guadalcanal and taken the under construction airfield, which was renamed Henderson Field. And we can also see here that Savo Island is on the northern part of this map, so there will probably be a naval component. That was one of the famous, the Battle of Savo Island was one of the famous naval engagements of the Guadalcanal campaign. But basically, this is taking place after the Japanese have landed reinforcements on Guadalcanal. Following the American landing, the Japanese landed more than 17,000 troops on the island to launch a counteroffensive against the American Marines there. The campaign started off relatively light for the Americans, but then when the Japanese started sending large numbers of reinforcements, through, that's when things really picked up from a combat standpoint. It was interesting. It was a very ingenious way that the Japanese were bringing men and material in that they were bringing them often in on destroyers or fast transports at night. In some cases, they would beach the transports on the island and then, offload. At least in one occurrence, the beach transport ended up being attacked as soon as the morning came by the American Air Force, before the Japanese had gotten all the men off. Basically, the interesting thing about Guadalcanal is it was strategically located so the Japanese could send ships at the beginning of the night down what was called the slot, get the ships to Guadalcanal in time to offload, and then withdraw again before the sun would come up, which meant that they could effectively bring troops and supplies in without fear of American air power, which was growing in the islands as the campaign went on. But first, actually, before we get too much into the scenario, and as I set up the map here, it's been a while since I've done a video, and I appreciate you guys hanging in there. We're almost to 8,000 subscribers. By the time this goes up, we might be at 8,000. And I'm still getting really positive feedback. A lot of people are continuing to comment on my videos. A lot of people are, kind of wondering, hey, where am I? What's going on? I think I told you in my last video, although to be honest, the last few weeks have been crazy. I think I told you guys that I was in the process of moving. So my wife and I actually moved out of state because she got a really good job offer, and it was still close enough where I could commute to my other job, or to my job. So we ended up moving like 70 or 80 miles, and so basically I was out of commission for a week moving, and then after we moved, the first week in our new place, I was out of town for work. So really, I've been more or less unavailable to do anything for 3 weeks or so when you include packing and unpacking and all of that, and we're still kind of trying to unbury ourselves from all these boxes here, but nonetheless, that's what's been going on with me. New place is a little bit smaller, so it's been a little bit frustrating to try and find places for all my technology and computer stuff when we've got so many other things as well. But yeah, that's what I've been up to, and I appreciate you guys tuning in. The Order of Battle series has always been something I wanted to return to. It's been months since I've looked at the base game of Order of Battle Pacific, but I decided, as sort of a hey, here's what I've been doing. I'm still here. I figured I'd use that because the actual gameplay footage I've just got laying around on my computer and have had laying around for a while. So I figured it would make a logical return to the series. In addition to that, I do want to do some videos of Stellaris, which is a new game out by Paradox, and the game is kind of a 4X space game. It's been very popular. It's actually really encouraging to see how successful it's been. It was the #1 selling game on Steam for at least the first day it launched, and it was ahead of all sorts of other AAA games. And I want to say right now when I looked, it was still #2 on Steam, which is phenomenal. 3 or 4, more than that, days later. It's been, I think, out a week almost now. So I saw some people on Paradox talking about how this was breaking all sorts of records for them. It actually was the most played game on Steam at one point, with over 50,000 active users playing the game. It's really cool to see a company that was pretty small not that long ago, and was a much more niche sort of strategy gaming company, have such tremendous success. They're not small by any means now. They're looking, I mentioned in one of my previous videos, they're looking at going public soon, which I'm sure this game being incredibly successful right before they've got to go public, so they can show all the financials and all the success that Stellaris has had when they ask people to give them money to buy parts of their company, is going to help them. But that's not really the point of this video. We'll do a video on Stellaris and talk about the game more there. Anyway, you can see here we're setting up our ground and naval forces. We have very limited air options. We can't really put much down at all for air units, and that goes to the fact that we do not have an air base on Guadalcanal. The interesting thing about the Guadalcanal campaign is the Japanese had built up a very large airfield and military base on at Rabaul. I want to say the island was New Britain, but basically the base of Rabaul, which is at the very northern end of the Solomon Islands. I don't think it was actually part of the Solomon Islands, but it was just north of the Solomon Islands. And they had built up this air base, and they had kind of started moving down the Solomons, but they hadn't really expanded any of the islands south of Rabaul to have airfields. So by the time the Guadalcanal campaign started, the Japanese were building an airfield on Guadalcanal because they were kind of at the limits of what Rabaul could support. However, when the Americans took Henderson Field before the Japanese had time to finish it, that meant that the Japanese air support either had to come in on carriers, which historically the Japanese had just lost midway, so they really were limited in their carrier support. They did bring in the Shokaku, I believe. I'm not sure what the other carrier was, but they did end up bringing 2 heavy carriers in, and there were several large naval engagements that were fought during the Guadalcanal campaign. So they were able to get some air support from that. They also flew aircraft down from Rabaul to support the Japanese on Guadalcanal. This was interesting because the Japanese had very long-ranged fighters when compared to the Americans. The Zero had extremely long range, over 1,000 miles, and that meant the Japanese were flying basically 500 miles each way. There were 8-hour-long flights, cramped in a tiny fighter. Not probably the best thing to do, to have really long-ranged missions like that over water and hostile terrain. It meant that your pilots were easily worn out. And they only had, I want to say, around 100 aircraft on Rabaul, so there was, very intense expectations placed on these pilots and these air crews, which basically just meant you were wearing these out, not just men, material, machines. It was kind of like in the same way it was like the American bombing campaign against Germany, really long flights that were exhausting, except that at least in the American fighter crew's case, they didn't have long enough range to make it all the way to Germany and back. The Americans did do it, but it's one of those things where if you don't have sufficient support, if you try and do this every day or every couple days, you're going to get worn out, and that's really what ended up happening to a lot of the Japanese aircraft and pilots as well. Whereas the Americans could take off and land in the span of 20, 30 minutes, it was much easier for a smaller force to maintain readiness if it doesn't have to fly too far. Anyway, you can see here our strategy is really going to be to have one massive advance in the north with the vast majority of our forces, and then we'll also have a smaller force that advances along the southern route. I'm sticking mainly to roads because in Order of Battle Pacific, things like terrain are very important when it comes to advancing successfully. So sometimes you'll see where, like for example here, you'll see -2 when I drag my unit across a certain map hex, and what that means is those troops are getting disorganized because they're moving through a forest or they're moving through rough terrain, which fatigues them, but it also makes them become disorganized or to some extent less efficient at fighting. So ideally you want to try and move where you don't have those negatives, and things like roads help there, so you don't have to worry about too much in the way of disruption. You still can have difficult terrain on roads. Maybe it represents a more narrow road where there's trees and terrain and it's still difficult to move across, but in general you want to try and stick to the roads. So there's this kind of major road here in the south. Looks like the Americans have some troops in the way kind of supporting the bridge there, that we're going to attempt to move south and help liberate these troops that are cut off behind enemy lines. And then in the north, we'll move toward the Henderson Field, which is right along the coast, and we'll try and liberate the troops there. Now, this particular battle takes place over 2 hours of gameplay, so we're obviously not going to show the whole thing right now. We'll probably break it into multiple parts, so it'll end up being a 3 or 4 part series where we play through the whole battle and go from there. Let's see here. So the other sort of unique aspect of the Guadalcanal scenario, again, is from the Japanese perspective, you've got these troops that are cut off behind enemy lines with limited supply. So essentially you need to try and reach them and liberate them before the Americans can destroy them. So they're cut off, they're behind enemy lines. That means they're less effective in fighting. If the Americans attack them, they won't do as well because of limited supply. And if we can reach them, then we can give them supply. But Japanese troops and some of the perks that I've researched in previous battles also give our cut-off troops a better ability to fight when low on supply, which certainly was historical. The Japanese troops underwent just kind of incredible obstacles and difficulties and still resisted despite often horrific conditions. You can see here a naval battle is looming. I want to say we sunk a destroyer last turn. You can see here the Americans have, looks like 3 destroyers and 2 cruisers that are now attacking our fleet, although our fleet is substantially stronger with some battleships and cruisers as well. We're using some of our destroyers as fire support against these American troops here on Savo Island. You can see here we just wiped that one unit out, and then we've also got an American machine gun bunker on the island. It's a secondary objective to seize or to take Savo Island, which would have been useful for the Japanese to do historically as well, because the island largely was a observation post where you could see enemy ships coming. You could kind of warn your fleet if there were enemy ships that you saw coming. It's basically a sentry for the troops on Guadalcanal, at least in this scenario. Anyway, that's the argument for why we'd be going after it. And you can see here my goal, whenever I fight a naval action in this kind of a game, I always try and isolate enemy units and kind of pick them off one at a time. So concentrate your fire on one ship. When that ship sinks, shift your fire to the next. Don't offer sporadic targeting where you have some ships target one ship, more ships target a different ship, and what have you. The more you concentrate your fire on a single enemy, the more quickly you destroy it, the less damage you will take. Long term, at least that's my theory. Bring my dive bombers in here to help against them as well. And there we go, another enemy vessel sunk. So it looks like we've destroyed 3 destroyers already here, with basically no loss to our own. You can see here it looks like 2 American cruisers remain, and should be able to wrap that fight up pretty quickly without too much in the way of losses. Meanwhile, on the northern end of the island here, you can see that the Americans have kind of their own roadblock. It seems like this game, a lot of the scenarios are roadblock scenarios when you're playing as the Japanese. And what I mean by that is, you'll advance, the enemy will have a few units kind of strategically positioned to try and slow you down, and the goal is to overwhelm them in advance without too much difficulty and without losing too much time. I haven't run into a scenario yet where it feels like the enemy is going to overwhelm me and destroy me, or where I feel like the enemy has a very well thought out defensive position. It seems like most of the AI positions are more speed bumps than they are actual obstacles to victory. It's just a matter of, can it slow you down enough so that you don't win, as opposed to, is it actually going to defeat you? So I think that kind of goes to the game. I've commented in the past that the game doesn't feel too much like a puzzle game, but at least in this aspect, I think maybe it does, and that can get a little annoying. It makes some sense. It's a really good tactic for like the Philippines scenario, where the American forces clearly have no real hope of ultimate victory, and their goal is really just to slow down and delay the Japanese as much as possible. That certainly mirrors what reality was as well. I don't know if that's as applicable to a scenario like Guadalcanal, though. It's not like the Americans need to buy time for reinforcements to arrive. I'm not really sure. The one other thing I also find interesting is, you win Midway and you still end up fighting Guadalcanal, which, again, if the American carrier fleet had been destroyed, they did provide support for the landing forces, although they withdrew early to land on Guadalcanal. It seems unlikely that the Americans would have felt confident enough to launch a counterattack at Guadalcanal without their carriers. If their entire fleet had more or less been destroyed at Midway, that seems highly unlikely. But anyway, that's me just kind of nitpicking a little bit here. You can see, looks like Savo Island's going okay. The Americans have another ground force there. So you've got two units. You've got a bunker and an infantry unit facing our two infantry units up there. Fortunately, we have naval support, so we can bring gunfire support down on them. The American Navy, meanwhile, is also preventing us from using our own Navy for fire support along the Guadalcanal coast. So that's something that we need to rectify quickly, although I'd rather just destroy these American ships as quickly as possible. Enemy cruisers are engaging our own. Looks like they still have one more destroyer, and they're attacking our northern force, which is a little bit annoying. In the south here, you can see, look, there's some American aviation, but so far they haven't tried to attack our troops that are cut off either, which is good because, again, we're having to deal with some roadblocks here. Let's see here. One of my favorite things in this game is the artillery. I think it's well done. I like the graphics. I like it in general. You can see here we're overwhelming the Americans in the north. Wipe those guys out. Drive these guys back. And finish them. There we go. Okay, so we just destroyed that entire blocking force in the north, which is excellent. Looks like the Americans have a jeep, but I'm not sure if they have another blocking force before we get to our Rivu. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. And now we gotta advance south as quick as we can, or not south. Now we have to advance east as quick as we can. Now that we've completely overwhelmed and destroyed that blocking force. Meanwhile, in the south here, we probably shouldn't leave these American troops in our rear. Again, you can kind of see the front line progress with this little red line across the screen as we move across the map, and that's the thing is if you leave the enemy behind you, they can sweep in behind you, cut off your supplies, and basically end your offensive. So that's something that a game like Panzer Corps, where you'd have no reason to leave troops behind you in the event of advancing, unless you're worried about just them coming in and taking an objective that you recently took. But outside of that, you don't have to worry about enemy troops sweeping in behind you and kind of blocking your supplies. That's a unique aspect of Order of Battle that you do have to take into consideration. In the north here, we're going to have to respond to this American attack on our destroyers, so we're probably going to have to postpone the attack on Savo at least one turn, because we're not going to have the gunfire support that we really want. Let's see here, our destroyers and aircraft finished that enemy destroyer off. And hopefully we can finish this American cruiser off pretty quick. Also, the more your ships maneuver, it seems the less accurate they are. So sure, you can close the distance, but if to another enemy ship. But if you do that, you have a less accurate gun, so you won't be able to destroy them as well. It's nice to see that torpedoes play a role as well, especially on the Japanese side where the ships are very heavily dependent on the long lance torpedo. That was really kind of the wild card that the Japanese had, and it really kind of peaked itself during the early battles, the early naval battles of Guadalcanal, where the long lance torpedo was used with incredible effect against the American Navy, where the Americans lost numerous heavy cruisers and warships to these Japanese torpedoes, whereas the American torpedoes, the naval torpedoes, had similar problems to what the submarine torpedoes the Americans had, and they were more or less useless. The Japanese often are portrayed as kind of backwards when it comes to technology, and in World War II they had great aviation, they had great torpedo technology, their gunnery was pretty good, but where they lacked was the radar technology, and that became more apparent as the war went on, and the Americans had more and more ships with this technology on them. Anyway, with that being said, this next turn should probably be the last one where we have to worry about the U.S. fleet, unless there's more warships somewhere. We should be able to more or less finish them all off. You can see the American Air Force is bombing us a little bit here in the south, but still they've made no effort to overwhelm any of our surrounded troops or our pockets, so that is gratifying to know. Do we want to take the Yamato north? Kind of destroy the cruiser slowly. That's one gripe I have, is it doesn't seem like... It doesn't really seem possible to have kind of decisive hits, like, oh, you hit an enemy ship's magazine or something and it blew up. That'd be kind of cool if you had something like that in this game, but it doesn't look like you do. Okay, cool. So we took Savo Island, and as a result, that triggered an event which gave us an extra destroyer and cruiser of support. Or at least we took the objective on Savo Island. There's still one American unit left there. Meanwhile, the American Navy's destroyed. Interestingly enough, I don't think I'd have any way to get the troops off the island and to Guadalcanal itself, because there's no ports there, so I don't think I'd have any way to embark my troops. But now that we've destroyed the American fleet, at least what we can see of it, if there's anything more, I'm not sure. Now we can move these ships closer to the coast and provide gunfire support for our infantry as we advance east along Guadalcanal. This is a 50-turn battle, so this is quite a long battle. We're about 22 minutes into this video. Again, I'll probably cut it off around 30. Anyway, so I like to advance multiple units forward to deal with enemy troops like this. So a lot of times you'll see me move 3 units in before I attack with any of them. And that's because if you have troops in adjacent hexes, it actually gives you a combat bonus. They can kind of support the attack. They may not be involved in the attack itself, but they can support the attack and give you a better combat roll. So that's something to keep in mind as well, is that you may think, why would I move one unit and then not attack, and then move another unit and then slowly attack with all 3? You know, what just happened to me where the enemy withdrew and I can't pursue them effectively because all my units have already moved, can happen, and that can lessen the effect of your attack. But it's useful to pursue such a strategy because of that support bonus. So sure, you risk not being able to pursue as well, but you also ensure better combat results early in the fight, rather than attacking piecemeal and getting yourself shot to pieces 3 or 4 different times as you slowly wear down the enemy. You can overwhelm them and defeat them promptly right off the bat if you do coordinate like that. Okay. So moving into the 5th turn, you can see the American infantry there is trying to get in behind us and cut our supply off. Like I said, that's one reason you'd want to attack and destroy them rather than leaving troops in your rear. It's always risky to do that. You can see, it looks like the Americans have some artillery here. Warriors from the sky. Okay, cool. So we got some paratrooper units that just showed up as a result of paratroopers coming in from the island of Truk, which was a kind of more central Pacific base that the Japanese had. Rabaul was kind of the main base in the Guadalcanal campaign, with tens of thousands of troops there that were supporting the entire Solomon Islands. A little bit north of Rabaul was another major Japanese stronghold, the island of Truk, which had a major naval force as well as air force base there. It was one of those islands that was bombarded incessantly by the Americans as the war went on. There were some very large naval and air battles fought in the area, but in general, it was never. I don't think it was ever landed on. They didn't really invest it. It kind of was part of the island hopping campaign, where you only attack certain islands where you're going to do well. You don't attack the enemy's strongholds per se, but you attack around them and you isolate their strongholds. And Truk was one of those bases. Wake Island became another one of those where the Americans just kind of let it sit out there by itself, kind of let the Japanese troops wither on the bone. But at the same time, while they did that, they used it for training, so you could train your pilots up on live targets, if you will, by having them bomb a isolated and ineffectual enemy position, but one with still real live targets that you could use to train up inexperienced crews. Okay. So we're about 10% of the way through the battle. So far, everything seems to be going pretty well. Let's see here, we've kind of got a Swiss cheese of a front line up here at the north. These American troops are kind of frustrating in that they're difficult to completely destroy. I don't know where I want to put the paratroopers, because if the enemy has anti-aircraft guns, we could certainly lose quite a few men pretty quickly. I also don't want to drop them too far behind enemy lines and get them cut off from supply. So I may just land them right along where my front line is right now, so that way we can just kind of bolster our front line in the south. I'm not going to move them to the north. We've got enough troops in the north. We're too weak in the south. We're probably too strong in the north, so we'll use these bonus troops to strengthen the southern part of the map. And again, maybe drop them near the front line so that way we don't have to worry about supplies. We can just directly get them into supply and use them really just as kind of infantry, not mechanized infantry, because I don't think they have any fast transport, but just kind of slow infantry. Continue moving our fleet to the east. Got to get it there a little bit quicker. It looks like the enemy does still have some naval forces there. You can see there was one unit with that blinking ship, which indicates that there are some naval troops still around. And it looks like we found our second American roadblock here on the northern part of the Guadalcanal coast. You can see here there's an anti-aircraft gun, artillery, some infantry, and some machine gun posts as well. So we'll have to kind of get forward and then slowly invest and destroy this. Now, the one thing is, as you see us moving through these different difficult terrains and fighting and withdrawing, our troops are slowly losing their cohesion, which means we may need to pause for a day or two soon to try and regain that, because you do lose cohesion, sometimes even just moving regularly and fighting regularly, where you don't lose anything, you still lose some of that cohesion, and it makes you much less effective, especially on the attack of the enemy there. Okay. So our artillery's already in range, that's good. And we're also somewhat bottled up here on the northern part, this northern coast road, if you will. We've got to take time to deploy off the road, so that's a little bit annoying. There, we destroyed that American unit. All right, so our flank is secure. We can now advance with more or less everybody down this road, and you can see another American unit is blocking our advance. Actually, it looks like the pocket in the south we don't have a really good road to if we want to try and liberate them. So not sure how we'll do that yet. We'll probably figure that out next battle. Meanwhile, Savo Island is completely under Japanese control now, so we're pulling our air force and our naval forces south to deal with the main threat on the island. And then you can see here, it looks like the Americans have 2 destroyers. I see a light cruiser there as well that we're going to have to deal with our fleet. But again, we still have 2 battleships, including the Yamato, so no worries there. We should be able to deal with any and all comers, or any and all challengers, if you will. So I think this probably makes a good time to cut the video off. Maybe in the next one I'll talk more specifically about the history of the Battle of Guadalcanal. This is just sort of a video I wanted to get up and kind of just say, hey guys, I'm still alive, I'm still playing games, I'm still enjoying myself. It's just been a hectic last month, really, more or less. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know if you want to see more of the Order of Battle series. I've got, I never finished the original campaign, and then they released the DLCs, the free Battle of Britain one, and they've got the U.S. Marines and the Chinese campaign, Morning Sun. I think they also announced they're looking at doing a Winter War, which would be interesting because it would move Order of Battle Pacific back to the European theater, which the series never really covered that. Battle of Britain was more of a mod than it was an official release. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with that. I'm not sure I quite understand just doing the Winter War as opposed to a wider World War II in Europe, but it is what it is. We'll see how it turns out. Anyway, guys, I appreciate you tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the video, and let me know what your guys' thoughts are. And with that said, until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.